Chapter 26, Part 1 of Volume 3 of A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Volume 3 of A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times, by François Guizot, translated by Robert Black. Chapter 26, The Wars of Italy, Charles VIII, 1483 to 1498, Part 1. Louis XI had, by the queen his wife, Charlotte of Savoy, 6 children. 3 of them survived him: Charles VIII, his successor; Anne, his eldest daughter, who had espoused Peter of Bourbon, Sire de Beaujeu; and Joan, whom he had married to the Duke of Orleans, who became Louis XII. At their father's death, Charles was 13, Anne 22 or 23, and Joan 19. According to Charles V.'s decree, which had fixed 14 as the age for the king's majority, Charles VIII, on his accession, was very nearly a major; but Louis XI, with good reason, considered him far from capable of reigning as yet. On the other hand, he had a very high opinion of his daughter Anne; and it was to her, far more than to Sire de Beaujeu, her husband, that 6 days before his death, and by his last instructions, he entrusted the guardianship of his son, to whom he already gave the title of king, and the government of the realm. They were oral instructions not set forth in or confirmed by any regular testament; but the words of Louis XI had great weight, even after his death. Opposition to his last wishes was not wanting. Louis, Duke of Orleans, was a natural claimant to the regency; but Anne de Beaujeu, immediately and without consulting anybody, took up the position which had been entrusted to her by her father, and the fact was accepted without ceasing to be questioned. Louis XI had not been mistaken in his choice. There was none more fitted than his daughter Anne to continue his policy under the reign and in the name of his successor. A shrewd and clever woman, if ever there was one, says Brantome, and the true image in everything of King Louis her father. She began by acts of intelligent discretion. She tried not to subdue by force the rivals and malcontents, but to put them in the wrong in the eyes of the public, and to cause embarrassment to themselves by treating them with fearless favor. Her brother in law, the Duke of Bourbon, was vexed at being only in appearance and name the head of his own house, and she made him Constable of France and Lieutenant General of the kingdom. The friends of Duke Louis of Orleans, amongst others his chief confidant, George of Amboise, Bishop of Montauban, and Count Dunois, son of Charles VII.'s hero, persistently supported the duke's rights to the regency; and Madame, the title Anne de Beaujeu had assumed, made Duke Louis governor of Ile de France and of Champagne, and sent Dunois as governor to Dauphiny. She kept those of Louis XI's advisers for whom the public had not conceived a perfect hatred like that felt for their master, and Commynes alone was set aside, as having received from the late king too many personal favors, and as having too much inclination towards independent criticism of the new regency. 2 of Louis XI's subordinate and detested servants, Oliver de Dames and John Doyac, were prosecuted, and one was hanged and the other banished; and his doctor, James Cattier, was condemned to disgorge 50,000 crowns out of the enormous presents he had received from his patient. At the same time that she thus gave some satisfaction to the cravings of popular wrath, Anne de Beaujeu threw open the prisons, recalled exiles, forgave the people a quarter of the talliage, cut down expenses by dismissing 6,000 Swiss whom the late king had taken into his pay, re established some sort of order in the administration of the domains of the crown, and in fine, whether in general measures or in respect of persons, displayed impartiality without paying court, and firmness without using severity. Here was, in fact, a young and gracious woman who gloried solely in signing herself Anne of France, whilst respectfully following out the policy of her father, a veteran king, able, mistrustful, and pitiless. Anne's discretion was soon put to a great trial. A general cry was raised for the convocation of the States General. The ambitious hoped thus to open a road to power; the public looked forward to it for a return to legalized government. No doubt Anne would have preferred to remain more free and less responsible in the exercise of her authority, for it was still very far from the time when national assemblies could be considered as a permanent power and a regular means of government. But Anne and her advisers did not waver. They were too wise and too weak to oppose a great public wish. The States General were convoked at Tours for the 5th of January, 1484. On the 15th they met in the great hall of the archbishop's palace. Around the king's throne sat 250 deputies, whom the successive arrivals of absentees raised to 284. France in all its entirety, says M. Picot, found itself for the first time represented. Flanders alone sent no deputies until the end of the session; but Provence, Roussillon, Burgundy, and Dauphiny were eager to join their commissioners to the delegates from the provinces united from the oldest times to the crown. Histoire des États Généraux, from 1355 to 1614, by Georges Picot, p. 360. We have the journal of these States General drawn up with precision and detail by one of the chief actors, John Massillin, canon of and deputy for Rouen, an eminent speaker, says a contemporary Norman chronicle, who delivered on behalf of the common weal, in the presence of kings and princes, speeches full of elegance. We may agree that, compared with the pompous pedantry of most speakers of his day, the oratorical style of John Massillin is not without a certain elegance, but that is not his great and his original distinction. What marks him out and gives him so high a place in the history of the 15th century is the judicious and firm political spirit displayed in his conduct as deputy and in his narrative as historian. The journal, written by the author in Latin, was translated into French and published, original and translation, by M. A. Bernier, in 1835, in the Collection des Documents Inédits relatifs d'Histoire de France. And it is not John Massillin only, but the very assembly itself in which he sat, that appears to us, at the end of 5 centuries, seriously moved by a desire for free government, and not far from comprehending and following out the essential conditions of it. France had no lack of States General, full of brilliancy and power, between 1356 and 1789, from the reign of Charles V. to that of Louis XVI.; but in the majority of these assemblies, that he was not expressing himself well as to the power and liberty of the people. The deputies asked leave to deliberate in the afternoon, promising a speedy answer. "As you wish to deliberate, do so, but briefly," said the chancellor. "It would be better for you to hold council now so as to answer in the afternoon." The deputies took their time, and the discussion was a long and a hot one. "We see quite well how it is," said the princes and the majority of the great lords. "To curtail the king's power, and pare down his nails to the quick, is the object of your efforts. You forbid the subjects to pay their prince as much as the wants of the state require. Are they masters, pray, and no longer subjects? You would set up the laws of some fanciful monarchy, and abolish the old ones." "I know the rascals," said one of the great lords; according to one historian, it was the Duke of Bourbon, Anne de Beaujeu's brother in law. "If they are not kept down by overweighting them, they will soon become insolent. For my part, I consider this tax the surest curb for holding them in." "Strange words," says Masselin, "unworthy of utterance from the mouth of a man so eminent;" but in his soul, as in that of all old men, covetousness had increased with age, and he appeared to fear a diminution of his pension. After having deliberated upon it, the states general persisted in their vote of a tax of 1,200,000 livres, at which figure it had stood under Charles VII., but for 2 years only, and as a gift or grant, not as a permanent talliage any more, and on condition that at the end of that time the states should be necessarily convoked. At the same time, however, over and above this, the said estates, who do desire the well being, honor, prosperity, and augmentation of the lord king and of his kingdom, and in order to obey him and please him in all the ways possible, do grant him the sum of 300,000 livres of Tours, for this once only, and without being a precedent, on account of his late joyful accession to the throne of France, and for to aid and support the outlay which it is suitable to make for his holy consecration, coronation, and entry into Paris." On this fresh vote, full of fidelity to the monarchy and at the same time of patriotic independence, negotiations began between the estates and the court. They lasted from the 28th of February to the 12th of March, but without result. At bottom, the question lay between absolute power and free government, between arbitrariness and legality; and on this field both parties were determined not to accept a serious and final defeat. Unmoved by the loyal concessions and assurances they received, the advisers of the crown thought no longer of anything but getting speedily rid of the presence of the estates, so as to be free from the trouble of maintaining the discussion with them. The deputies saw through the device; their speeches were stifled, and the necessity of replying was eluded. "My lord chancellor," said they at an interview on the 2d of March, 1484, "if we are not to have a hearing, why are we here? Why have you summoned us? Let us withdraw. If you behave thus, you do not require our presence. We did not at all expect to see the fruits of our vigils, and the decisions adopted after so much trouble, by so illustrious an assembly, rejected so carelessly." The complaints were not always so temperate. A theologian, whom Masselin quotes without giving his name, a bold and fiery partisan of the people, says he, added these almost insulting words: "As soon as our consent had been obtained for raising the money, there is no doubt but that we have been cajoled, that everything has been treated with contempt, the demands set down in our memorials, our final resolutions, and the limits we fixed. Speak we of the money. On this point our decisions have been conformed to only so far as to tell us, this impost shall no longer be called talliage, it shall be a free grant. Is it in words, pray, and not in things, that our labor and the well being of the state consist? Verily, we would rather still call this impost talliage, and even blackmail, maltot, or give it a still viler name, if there be any, than see it increasing immeasurably and crushing the people. The curse of God and the execration of men upon those whose deeds and plots have caused such woes! They are the most dangerous foes of the people and of the commonwealth." The theologian burned with a desire to continue, adds Masselin; but, though he had not wandered far from the truth, many deputies chid him and constrained him to be silent. Already lethargy had fallen upon the most notable amongst us; glutted with favors and promises, they no longer possessed that ardor of will which had animated them at first; when we were prosecuting our business, they remained motionless at home; when we spoke before them, they held their peace or added but a few feeble words. We were wasting our time. On the 12th of March, 1484, the deputies from Normandy, 25 in number, happened to hold a meeting at Montilz les Tours. The Bishop of Coutances told them that there was no occasion for the estates to hold any more meetings; that it would be enough if each of the 6 sections appointed 3 or 4 delegates to follow the course of affairs; and that, moreover, the compensation granted to all the deputies of the estates would cease on the 14th of March, and after that would be granted only to their delegates. This compensation had already, amongst the estates, been a subject of a long discussion. The clergy and the nobility had attempted to throw the whole burden of it upon the third estate; the third estate had very properly claimed that each of the 3 orders should, share proportionately in this expense; and the chancellor had with some difficulty got it decided that the matter should stand so. On the 14th of March, accordingly, the 6 sections of the estates met and elected 3 or 4 deputies apiece. The deputies were a little surprised, on entering their sessions hall, to find it completely dismantled; carpets, hangings, benches, table, all had been removed, so certainly did the government consider the session over.